and I'm not sure how many people are already here, but I'm going to start anyway. So Bernat just pasted a link there on chat for you guys. That's the same that you can see there in my screen. So if this is not necessary to follow the workshop. It's just a little help for you, for those of you who are not so much computer Grasshopper savvy. That actually already includes some of the pre-made definitions that we're going to work with. Again, this is not a requirement, but if you feel like you're not too fast on the Grasshopper side, this might help you just get through. Bernat, you ready?
Yes, ready when you are. Okay,
great. So yeah, I think we can just start. Welcome everyone, and this is hopefully the first of hopefully many series of workshops that we're going to be giving on the line of the free Flash workshops that already have started a few weeks ago. And in this one in particular, we're going to focus on the GhPython component, Python through Grasshopper, and this is going to be this is going to take it from the beginner level. So for those of you who have already had some experience with GhPython, this might be hopefully hopefully not a bit boring to you, but we want to start from the beginning to actually get the basis set and clear for everyone, and so that we can continue to work on more advanced stuff on the future. Along with me is my colleague Bernat, who's in chat now, and he's going to be the one answering questions from you.
Hello, everyone. Just feel free to ask anything you want on the chat.
You can ask that on chat or to the question and answers panel there that you have. There's also Giuseppe is also with us, joining us today, and he also is going to be answering questions on the Grasshopper Python side. If there's anything that you want to say in particular, anything not working, just raise your hand, and they'll look into it. I won't be looking too much into the chat, but they'll go for my attention if needs be. It's nice to see so many familiar names there on the list. I see a few of you few people that I already know. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Andrés León, and I work for McNeil Europe, and I'm in charge of tech and development support here in the Barcelona office. As I was saying before, this workshop it's going to be taking Grasshopper, Python in Grasshopper from the beginning, straight from the beginning. So if you have had already some knowledge on Python, I hope at least that this actually sets some fills in some holes of the knowledge that you have. Otherwise, let's just probably continue. If you haven't downloaded this file already, don't worry. We're just gonna build the definitions from scratch, okay? So I'm gonna just start, and we're just gonna start today by looking at the anatomy of the Grasshopper component. Bernat, please, if you don't see my screen or anything is fuzzy, let me know, okay?
Yes, no problem.
Here we are. Now we have you guys already know some Grasshopper, and you're familiar with the structure of the components here, right? The GhPython component is actually located in the Maths tab here, under the Script subtab here, and it's cited by the C# and VB script component, which are the other two languages that you can access scripting through in Grasshopper. The Grasshopper, the Grasshopper component is not unlike the other components that you have in Grasshopper. You have on the left hand side, you have a certain set of inputs and outputs on the right hand side. There are some particularities to these components which we will see along the workshop. But the main thing is that actually, if you right click on the center of this one, it has other types of options that the other components don't have. The one that we're going to focus in this particular workshop is going to be the Open Editor option. There are many more which we will actually look into in further, more advanced workshops, perhaps. But for now, what we want to do is just open the editor, and it'll actually bring us to the editor side of the component here. So the Grasshopper Python component has included this scripting editor that you can work with already, and it automatically fills in this inbuilt template for you, which you can actually set here in the tools. I'm not going to look too much into the modes and the tools that you have up here, but just focus on the main scripting part here. So this is already inbuilt, and it's actually when you press test to run the component, it does nothing in the beginning. It's just actually, to begin with, it's just importing this random script syntax library, which we're also going to look further hopefully in another series. But for now, what's important to us is just to know that when you right-click on the center and open the editor, you get presented with this editor interface where you can start scripting, or you can also do that just by double-clicking on the center of the component here. That does the same thing, just opens the editor, and you can actually start scripting. Okay, simple enough, and that's actually just to begin with. We can move to the second part, which I'm just going to expand a little bit here, which is actually changing the name and the number of inputs and outputs here. So what I have here, you don't have already in your Grasshopper definition, but what it's as simple as this. You can actually right-click on if you right-click on the inputs of the Grasshopper component, you can actually change the name of the inputs. No, so in this case, whereas it used to be X, I have actually changed that to first input here, right? And where Y used to be, I have changed this to second input. Right? Easy enough. And same goes for the output part of the component, which is on where A used to be here on the standard component. I have changed this to first output, or whatever you want to put into here. This is just entirely up to you. Is naming, right? Now there is a special little thing with the Grasshopper component that other components don't have, which is this out part here, and I'll explain to you a little bit further how this works, right? Because this is a special output of the component that we want to keep and keep the name. So for the time being, do not rename this output here. We're just going to leave the out part for later. Just a few tips on how you should actually name inputs and outputs, and this is just mainly Python conventions, is that names should be always case sensitive, which means it's not the same. Having this is not the same as having this, right? And they always usually also begin with a letter or the underscore. So that means that beginning with a number is not allowed. I mean, in this case, Python maybe will accept it, but the component will accept it, but Python won't accept it. And then other characters and letters are allowed that are not this. So basically, whatever that you put into, if you put a hash, it won't work. If you put a number, it won't work. What you can use for naming is actually only letters and numbers, and the first character should always be a letter. So in this case, like I had before, first input will work, right? The second part is that these are just mainly Python conventions. They are not necessary rules, but the naming of these inputs is that they shouldn't be too wordy. So that means that maybe this one that I have put second input is already a little bit wordy, but it shouldn't be that much wordy. So I shouldn't try to name this like second input of first definition, right? Because this will already generate too much complexity, and this, as I said, this will be actually accepted by the Python compiler and by the Python debugger eventually, but this won't work for as a Python convention, okay? So I'm just going to leave this as second input. And also, they should be a little bit descriptive of what they are. So in this case, I'm actually describing that these are inputs and these are outputs, which is okay. And there's also another Python convention is that they should be separated by underscores. So in other programming language, there's different word separation conventions, such as a camel case one, which is this, for example, first input, which is actually naming the second word with a first with a capital I. So that's actually another convention which is pertaining to another programming language. For Python, the one that's the usual convention is separating the variables with underscores. So I'm just going to leave this first input here. Okay. So another special thing about the component here is that if you zoom in the component, it will allow for you to actually expand the component a bit. So this is kind of akin to the list item component or other components in Grasshopper which actually have variable inputs and outputs, right? So the Python component in particular will allow you to have n number of inputs and outputs, so you can have n number of variables going into your component, as here, and the same goes for the outputs here, right? Like such. So this actually allows you to bring as many things as you want from Grasshopper into the component, and then from the component out back to Grasshopper again, right? Okay, so before I go any further, I'm just going to double click into this one and maybe start with the most simple things, probably the simplest thing that we can do with Python, which is just printing stuff. So let me just, I can actually just delete all of this, which is not necessary, and start just with the first line here. I'm gonna maybe make this a little bigger so that you see, right? And I'm going to just print the first thing that should ever be printed ever if you just started programming, which is a typical hello world. I do this just by opening two double quotes and putting hello world inside of this, right? Okay, so this is maybe the first command that you're ever gonna run. And what this is doing is just basically printing something, which is not actually doing anything else than just displaying information for you here in the component here, right? But if I type it, of course, it doesn't really do anything unless until actually I press the test button here on the right-hand side. Right now, what just happened? I get displayed with the thing that I've just printed here in the output part of the component, which is here below. Right. So whatever I print, I can actually access it by reading it here, down here in the bottom part of the component, or I can use the out parameter of the component that it has an inbuilt functionality, which will actually show you anything that you have already printed. So that's just to say that the out part, the output of the component belongs to everything that you print here inside the component, right? So let me just make another example. So just print printing the outside, right? And this will actually get displayed down here. I'll talk a bit further about how why do I use double quotes and why and how does this work. This is just to show you how in a nutshell, how does the component work to begin with, right? I can actually also print a number, maybe 10, and that would work. So I'm gonna actually use this a lot throughout the tutorial, printing stuff, which is gonna be useful for me to see whether I am right about the stuff that I'm coding, or whether I want to check what's inside a variable or the type of such. I'm always printing stuff, and then if I want to actually continue coding but continue without printing this, I can actually access the comment function, right? And in Python, in order to tell the editor not to run these 3 lines when I press test, in the case that I want to actually keep them, I can actually comment them, which I do by putting a hash character in front, right? And you can see that the whole line has turned green, which means that now if I actually press the test button again here, that the whole line that's on the that has the hash in front that has turned green has been omitted from the run script. That means that it's omitted from running, right? So that way, I actually get to keep this thing written here in the case that I would actually like to run it afterwards, or in the case that I would just to maybe say, for example, say a comment and say, this next line is representing 20. So I'm actually using the comment to communicate inside the code, and this line won't work if I actually just say print 20. Right? So this is super useful, and this is basic Python stuff to know. And this is something that I'm going to continually be doing throughout the workshop, is actually typing stuff and then commenting it so that I can continue using the same editor without having to run the stuff that I just typed above. Okay. So printing and commenting, maybe two of the most basic stuff that you can do in Python. Since the time is short, I think I'm just going to move to the next couple of things. Okay. Now, if you have already downloaded the file that I texted above, that Bernat showed in the beginning of that should be in the top of the chat that you have there. There's a link to a file which actually gives you the file that I'm working with here. But if not, it's no problem. We're just going to work with very basic Grasshopper parameters, which are the ones that you can access in this tab, right? And I have mainly just thrown a Boolean parameter, an integer parameter, a float parameter here, which is like a decimal parameter, and a text parameter. And then for these two, I have actually just brought in, sorry, I'm just going to expand this a little bit. I've just brought in a point anywhere here. I just drawn a point either by setting it or bringing it through from the random document, and the same for a curve. I've actually just drawn a curve here, any curve, it doesn't matter, and brought it to the Grasshopper canvas here by setting one curve, right? Perfect. So the idea is that you guys already have these components filled with some information, like I have just done before here, so that we can bring it inside the Python component, right? And this is how this works. Sorry, when I open the editor, it jumps to the other screen, but I'm bringing it back here. Okay, right? So what have I got now in front of me? What I have done actually is to created a Grasshopper component, right? I have, maybe I'm just gonna do this from scratch so that you can see. I'm just gonna close this. I have created a Grasshopper component here, right? And I'm starting to connect inputs to it, right? For those of you who already know some Grasshopper, you should be no strangers to this procedure. I'm just actually, this is actually the same as a merge component or whichever other component that you have that has variable inputs. So what I have just done is just created multiple number of inputs here, and I have just renamed them to a name that I have chosen. In this case, I was being very explicit about the names. For the Boolean, I typed Boolean. For the integer, I have typed integer. For the decimal, I have typed decimal. For the string, I have typed text, I think before. For the point, and for the curve, right? So far, no hassle there. Perfect. Now, this is the first step that I should do to actually bring stuff from Grasshopper inside my component. sorry, it's kind of annoying that when I open the editor, it goes to the other window. So I think if I close and open, now it works. Perfect. Perfect. So in the beginning, the components used to be yellow because it actually didn't have anything to work with. If I press test, it should turn to the normal output, which means it's actually taking in these inputs that I'm inputting, but it's not doing anything with them, right? So what I actually want to do to start with is to start checking if I have these inputs inside my code and if I can actually access them to start working with them. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this whole bunch of information that I don't need for the time being, just for the sake of clarity, and start by printing what we have just learned, printing these variables that I have brought. So let's say, since I've named my Boolean very explicitly, I can actually just print Boolean here, and it would actually tell me the value of it. No, the variable name is Boolean, the variable value is false in this case. If I turn the toggle to true, it's going to turn to true, and so on and so forth, right? Not much mystery there. Same happens for integer. If I change this to integer, it actually, I can bring whatever information I have displayed in this letter here into the Grasshopper, into the Python editor, so that I can start working with it. Same goes for the decimal, which actually it's what's called a floating number in Python. So when I move the slider, the component, you can see that the component automatically updates. I apologize that I cannot actually zoom in further in this side, but I hope that you can see well. And same goes for text, right? If I print text, it does the same. Now, if I do text, it does nothing. You can see there's no error there if I just do text, but it's just not going to do anything unless they actually print it like above. If I happen to have made a mistake, for example, and put another character there, then Python will automatically tell me, hey, there's a little mistake here in line 6, the name text2 is not defined, and that's because the name here, text2 is not defined. The name that I actually defined is the name text here. So then I have to correct it and press test again. Or if you want to do this a little faster, instead of pressing test, you can also press F5, which is something that I'm continuously doing, pressing F5 inside the script editor in order to refresh the runtime. Perfect. Now, I'm not sure if I'm gonna get ahead of myself here, but maybe some of you have already think that you have had inputted the inputs correctly, and they look okay, like here, right? But then you get an error. You say name Boolean is not defined, and this is a very common mistake in the beginning. That I don't know, for some reason we're used to typing and pressing the space bar, right? And what just happened here is that the input has a space character, an extra space character here, as you can see, right? So I have to actually make sure that I don't have any extra space, white space here, because otherwise it's going to give me an error, which is going to be very hard to detect, because on plain sight, I can see Boolean here. I think it's correct, but obviously there's a white space there that I'm not considering, okay? So just make sure that you always have this right, and I think the more you get used to working with this component, the more it's gonna be obvious to you, this type of errors. Now, what about the point and curve? So what happens if I print a point now? And let me just comment the stuff that I just did here, because I just want to work with a point for now. It's kind of strange because instead of getting these point coordinates that I get from the point, I get something else. I get this weird series of characters here, which is actually called a GID in an identification number in Rhino. And this is because actually Python, the Grasshopper Python, component doesn't know that I'm actually feeding it a point inside of it unless I explicitly tell it to. And this is one of the second parts, one of the second most common mistakes that beginners do with working with Python is not setting the proper type hints, which I'm going to show you. So when you're working with basic types like Boolean, integers, decimal, or texts like the ones that you have here, there is no problem. Python will interpret those and print them as such. But when you're working with more complex types or like the Rhino types, points and curves, you have to actually explicitly tell the Python component that you're doing so by right-clicking on the input here. This is what I'm doing, right-clicking on points, as you can see here. Going down here to type hint, and explicitly telling Grasshopper Python component, which is the type that I want him to interpret. In this case, it's a point3d. So I'm just gonna pick point3d. And then you can see that the output here is now has changed to the same thing that I get from the panel. It's actually the coordinates of the point, right? And if I want to actually check that, check what type do I have, I can use the type function, which is one that's very useful for checking what type of things am I dealing with. So for doing that, I just print type of points. And this is how you do functions in Python, by the way. Functions have you can access them by a parenthesis. Well, this is common for many programming languages, but for the beginners here, what I'm doing here is using the type functions, right? So if I do this, if I print the type, then Grasshopper is going to tell me that the point input that I'm bringing from Grasshopper to the editor is of type point3d, right? If I do just type, nothing happens. I mean, this line is already running, but I don't get any display from it, so I actually have to print the type to get the type, right? Okay, same happens for the curve. I'm just gonna do the same thing here. So if I print the curve that I'm bringing here, I get the identifier of the geometry. If I want to actually turn it to if I were to actually turn it to something that the Python can read, I have to set type hint and explicitly tell it that it's a curve. Right? Perfect. Now I can print the curve, as you can see here. So I get presented with a object and not the ID, which is the NURBS curve at the memory location so and so. And if I would actually like to check what type that is, I can do the same. I can print the type of curve, and that will give me the type of the curve here. Okay, great. I see that there's some questions up there. I know, I think that Bernat is dealing with them already. Okay, perfect. And just to clarify to Michael that I'm just going to do a little clarification. This is what we're working here in Grasshopper Python is not Python per se, not the most common implementation of Python, which is CPython. What we're working within here is a special flavor of Python, which is called Iron Python, right? So some of the stuff that you have already learned, if you know some Python already, some of the stuff might change while you're working here, because this is another flavor, another implementation of Python, which is meant to work with the .NET framework. Okay, so and this, by the way, and one more thing, this implementation of Python is based on the 2.7 version of Python. So if you have actually had some experience with Python before and you used to, let's say, Python 3.7, 3.6.7, where you would actually have to, for instance, put a parenthesis in here to begin with, this will work here. But you don't have to do this because we're working with the 2.7 implementation of Iron Python. If you're interested in more of this, there's a lot of documentation out there online on Iron Python. You just have to Google Iron Python, and that would probably clarify it for you. In any case, I think that's already good for inputs, no? But let's just use the same example to output something into the Grasshopper canvas, because it's actually not much good at whatever we do inside the component unless we can actually bring it back to work with. So to bring stuff from the editor back to the canvas, the only thing I have to do is actually assign whatever I want to bring. For example, let's say I want to bring the integer here. If I want to bring the integer outside, I have to assign it to the output variable that I have in the right-hand side of the component here, right? So what's happening here in the editor now is that all of the lines in green are not running, and then first I'm printing the point, and then I'm printing the type, then I'm printing the curve, then I'm printing the type of the curve, and then lastly I'm actually doing this. I'm actually assigning the integer variable that I have already here to the output A of the component, right? And you can see that I actually have the same thing here. So if I bring a panel and I put it into the component already, I can see that whatever I put, this is, Python is not doing anything smart. It's just actually working as a bridge in between the integer here, the integer in the input, and putting it straight to the output without doing anything fancy, right? Yes, as one of the attendees is actually asking, as I said, one of the most common, if you get this type of error like type git, is usually the typical error that you get in the beginning is that you haven't set the proper type hint here, right? So if you want to bring a point, then you have to explicitly say type hint point here. And if you want to bring a curve, then you have to explicitly say type hint curve. Otherwise, if I say no hint or GhDoc, then it's going to give me the type git, which is what some of you are getting, right? So always make sure of this. Make sure that you always, if you're bringing stuff from Grasshopper to Grasshopper Python, make sure you always bring the right type. In this case, it's not the right type, so it's a mistake. Python will tell you it's a curve, and then it's good. Okay? Great. So now we can actually, this is easy. Now we have managed to bring some stuff from Grasshopper into the component by feeding it straight into the inputs. Then we do whatever we want to do in here in the code, and then we output it back by actually assigning it to a variable that I have here, right? But let's say I can actually change the name of this variable A and say output, right? If I press test, it's probably gonna be, I get nothing because there's nothing being outputted to A. But if I actually change this to output, then I'm actually saying that the output should be the same as the integer that I have here. Okay, and that's actually called assignment. Now I'm gonna deal with this a bit more in depth now, a minute from now. So let's just close this one here and leave it for now. And I'm just gonna actually show you a bit more into this by creating variables from the beginning, right? So I'm just gonna go a little bit below here for those of you who have the Grasshopper document. It's down here, right? For those of you who don't, I'm just gonna start from the beginning anyway. And just probably I'll just do this again. I'm bringing one of the GhPython components here now. Now I can actually delete these two for the time being because I don't need them for now, and I can actually work with a component without any inputs, because that's just what we're gonna do now. We're gonna actually create these variables from the component itself instead of bringing them from Grasshopper. So I delete the content of it because I'm really not interested in it anymore for the time being, and I can actually start. Right? And I can actually start by saying, for example, the same thing that I had before. Instead of having the Boolean bring from Grasshopper, I can create my Boolean variable like so, and assign it to a value. In the case of a Boolean, it's always true. Sorry, true or false, right? Just like in Grasshopper. In the case of an integer, it's an integer number, like a 10 or 100. In the case of a decimal, it's the same. It's the same, but with a decimal number, right? In the case of a text or a string, it's the same. Now, for strings, you remember you always have to use the double quotes, or the single quotes will also work. And I can actually assign a text to this, right? Now, these are different types, and actually the same as the types that we had here before, as you can see. And you can work with them straight away by creating them in the GhPython component directly by this procedure, which is called assignment, which is not anything else than just saying this little container called text will contain this piece of information in the right-hand side, which is, in this case, a text, or in this case, a decimal, or an integer, or a Boolean. Okay. For those of you who are familiar with Grasshoppers, this concept shouldn't be too hard to grasp because you have already been introduced and familiar with these types. Okay. Just to prove this a bit, if I print Boolean here, I get true, right? If I print integer, then I get 10. If I print the type of integer, then I get int, which is the type integer, right? If I print the type of decimal, then I will get float, which is the type of the decimal. It's actually the name Python, the way that Python tells it's a decimal point. And if I print the same with text, sorry, I print text, it should actually tell me the same. It's a string, right? So string actually means text. It's actually the same as you writing in a panel in Grasshopper. Decimal means a decimal number. Float means a decimal number. Integer means int, and so on and so forth. Now, there's times when you're scripting that you actually want to convert one thing to the other. Let's say, for example, I want to actually convert this Boolean to an integer, and I can actually do that. What I want to do, for example, is I'm just going to create a new variable, which is going to be called Boolean to integer, and you can actually call this whatever you want. In my case, I just want to be very explicit. And I want to, I'm gonna grab my Boolean from above, right? And in this case, it's still gonna be a Boolean. To prove it, I'm just gonna print the type. If I print the type of bool to int, it's gonna tell me it's a Boolean. I'm gonna comment this out so that you can see better, right? Let me just bring this, put this a little bit bigger, perfect. Okay, right. So what I'm doing here, it's creating a new variable called bool to int, and I'm assigning the same value that I had from the Boolean here, which is in this case true, and I'm printing the type of this new variable that I'm creating, right? Now, if I would actually like to convert this one from Boolean to int, then I can do this procedure which is called casting, which is actually just saying that instead of having the Boolean, I can actually convert it to an integer by saying, hey, don't give me the Boolean, give me actually the integer version of this. And if I actually print the type of it, then I get an integer. Now you may wonder what does an integer version of a Boolean is, and if you actually print bool to int, you will figure that a Boolean version of true, an integer version is true, is always 1, and an integer version of false is always 0. This also works for Grasshopper. If you actually have a slider from 1 to 0 and pass it to a Boolean toggle, to a Boolean parameter here, 1 will mean true, 0 will mean false. And this is also very common for most of the programming languages we have, right? What I wanted to show you is that you can actually cast some of this stuff to other things, like, in this case, cast a Boolean to an integer, or let me just do another example. I can actually cast a string to an integer too. For example, if I have let me call this new string, right? And I'm just gonna make a new string called, that's gonna be 100, right? Be careful, I've just declared a string because this is in red and this is in between double quotes. This is not the same as doing this, which is actually declaring an integer, right? Whenever there's double quotes and there's in the text turned red, it's a string type. So new string, if I print new string, it's gonna be, of course, 100, right? I comment this out again. It's 100, no? But even though it looks like an integer, if I print the type of it, it's actually a string, which means if I try to add or do something to this 100, which is actually not actually an integer, it's going to be telling me that it's not permitted, no? But if I would like to change this to an integer, I can say, for example, string, just calling this variable like this because I want to, and then I'm just going to say, hey, convert that variable that I had up here called new string into an integer, right? So if I actually print this now, I print string to integer, it's also going to give me 100, but if I print the type of it, you see me copy pasting a lot. I'm sorry, I'm kind of lazy to write, so this is easier. And then you can see it's actually an integer. Now, this concept, even for whatever dull or boring that it might seem to you, it's going to be super useful afterwards for transforming not only the basic types like integers, booleans, decimal, and strings, but actually transforming other types like points, curves, and whatnot. And just keep it in mind for the future. Okay. Perfect. So let's just say that for the sake of it, I want to just output this into the, I'm just going to name this output and just put name equals new string, let's say. And of course, Grasshopper is anyway going to give me the same, even if it's a string or even if it's a string or even if it's an integer. Just to show you, Grasshopper will interpret it in its own way. Okay. Let me check the chat. No, hold on. There you are. Be minded. These are two different things, right? Whatever you get in the out part of the component is actually exactly the same of what you get as down here, which is just printing. But whatever I get here afterwards are the variables that I define as an output, which is not the same, right? Okay. Let's see, if there's not any question, I'm just gonna continue for the sake of time. We have, I think, 15 minutes left. We wanna finish on time. Okay, perfect. Let's do it. And now let's do some math, because now we can actually, we know that we can bring some stuff from Grasshopper into Python. We know that we can put it out again. So in order to have at least some functionality throughout this course, let's just do some basic math, okay? So again, those of you who have this definition already should have this. In any case, this is nothing else than just throwing a component into the canvas, and I've just put a couple of sliders here to play with, right? Cool. Now, as always, even though Grasshopper recognizes the integers, I want to be very explicit about this all the time, and I want to tell it is of type in integer, type in integer here, right? And if I double click the component, it should bring me the new component information. I'm going to get rid of this again, just for the sake of clarity this time. And I'm going to show you that I can actually start to do some basic math operations, right? So in this case, I'm always printing not to be outputting too much stuff, but for example, if I print x, I can do x plus y, right? And this will actually be using Grasshopper Python component as a simple calculator. No, it's no different than the expression component. Actually, you can actually do any type of operation like this. And I will do a few of them because I think they're quite easy to grasp. Right? I can multiplication and division, like so, right? Division, fraction, multiplication, and division. For those of you who are not very familiar with programming from before, the asterisk sign is the equivalent of the cross for multiplication, and the slash is equivalent for division, right? So if I do this is actually giving me all of the results. First printing x plus 1, x minus x plus y, x minus y, x times y, x divided by y, right? So no big mystery there. Now, what if I want to actually output something here? Let me just create something that's going to be called an operation, whichever operation. This is a random name that I've just come up with. And I'm going to do something a little bit more complex. For example, what if I do x plus y times x minus y, right? I usually ask the students to figure out this operation, and the answer is also usually wrong because what you have to actually let me actually output this to the output of Grasshopper so that I can see, right? And what I'm doing is actually bringing this out to Grasshopper through the a variable here, right? So I'm bringing this operation outside, and what's happening here is that you need to specify an order about this operation, because otherwise, how does Python knows which is the specific order that it should go through? Now, this is actually a concept called hierarchy, and what happens is that the operations get they actually have a hierarchy, and they happen in this order, right? So division comes first, and then multiplication, and then subtraction, and then addition. So if I actually want to be very specific about how this operation should go about, then I should probably do, let's say, another operation, right? And instead of doing this, which is going to probably yield a more random result, I can use the parentheses, just like in any other math software, to specify which are the hierarchies that I want the operation to have. Right. So if I would like to output this to another, let's say I want to output this to another variable here, bring another panel, and I output the second expression, you can see, of course, that the results are quite different. Marco, you're kind of right. You're kind of right. IronPython is different than CPython in some senses, and IronPython it's not like, I think it's more difficult, but it does lack certain functionality that CPython has. In any case, I think if you know already some CPython, this should probably be quite straightforward to you already. Now, one more thing that I'd like to show you is that, for example, in this case, in this operation, let's say, for example, I'm just going to create another output variable here called C, and tag a panel to it so that I can see the results. So far, I do not have anything being outputted to C, but let's say I output x divided by y, right? Then I have a decimal. Actually, I have a decimal number, right? Now, what if I want to round this one to the next number? And that's something that you actually want to do very commonly in math. Then I can simply use the round function here to round the result of this into the next immediate next number, right? And this is also to show you that I can actually use these functions, and whatever I put into them, it can be actually an actual expression here, like a mathematical expression, and this will be evaluated first, and then being assigned to C a variable, and then outputted to Grasshopper, right? Okay. So this is basically the basics of math. So now you can with this knowledge, you can actually use the Python component now as maybe akin to the expression variable, to the expression component here. But if we would actually want to use more functionality than just the plus and minuses and the type of signs that you get in the keyword, we will actually have to import a library, which is called the math library, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Now, I have just created another Grasshopper component down here, and with this one, I want to show you how to import stuff that you can work with. And Michael, the answer is yes. You can import other modules that you've written, and I will probably show you this in a more advanced class in the future if you want. So sorry for the typo here. Importing modules. I would just like to show you how to import modules from well, there's actually existing modules from Python. In this case, it's going to be the math module. So I'm going to import math, and you can see that as soon as you hit the import keyword in Python, then you get a little type hint here. You get a little drop down here that actually tells you which are the inbuilt functions that you can import into the component, and there are a few of them here already, right? And I'm going to show you a few of them in the future in further series, but for now, what I only want to show you is how to use the math library, which is down here, right? Now, this is all it takes. This is all it takes to import a library to Python. So I have just actually imported the math library here. And if I press play and I type math, then dot, you can see that I can actually access a lot of the functions that are inside the Grasshopper expression component already, which is the mathematical functions that are more complex than what you can actually do with a keyword down here. Okay. So let me give you an example. What if I want to access pi, like the constant pi, the mathematical constant pi? This is actually already hard-coded into this library, and if I press math.pi, I would be able to print it in a maybe 10-digit version of it, which is super useful for then dealing with radians or with degrees, right? I can do the same, for example, for power. If I want to raise something to the power of x, for example, I want to raise 2 to the power of 8, let's say, right? It's actually telling me down here, hey, give me b and give me a float and then give me the exponential number. Then then I'm actually raising 2 to the power of 8, right? Which in Python you can actually also do with the double asterisk. It's actually the same. There are also some very useful functions like translating degrees to radians. For example, if I want to get the degrees of some radians, I can do math.degrees. And then, for instance, if I want to get the degrees of, let's say, pi, right? If I print this, it should give me 180, which is actually the degrees version of the equivalent of pi. And same, if I want to turn this back to radians, for example, I can use the math.radians and transform that into radians back, and let's say print radians. And there you go. You get the degrees that we had before. They get transformed back to radians again. One last thing that I want to show you before we end It's another very useful, very common library that you use. It's the random library, and I'm gonna do it quite quick, so that we can have some questions hopefully in the end. And notice that another convention and another very important convention in Python is to have all of the libraries imported in the top. So if I want to import the random library, which sometimes actually you don't get a hint here, but trust me, it's there. If you type import random, then you're gonna have access to the random library. Now notice that all of the libraries are here on top, and that's how it should be. You should always import the libraries first, right? Now down here, I'm just gonna comment all of this. Now down here, I can actually access random numbers already. So for example, if I want to do a random integer, I can access the random library and say random.randint, and it asks, the function asks me for an interval. Like if I want a random number from 10 to 20, then I would specify 10 to 20. If I print this variable, this is going to give me, always going to give me a different number from 10 to 20, right? And same happens for random. If I want to do random floats, or then I would actually use the uniform function of the library, which will give me a random float. Okay, so every time I run the component, it's giving me first a random integer, which is the one I'm specifying here, and secondly a random float number, which is the one I'm specifying here. Okay. Okay, great. So that's it. That's everything that I wanted to cover during this first very beginner's part of the Python tutorial, GhPython tutorial, which I hope has been enough for you guys to start playing around and clear enough so that you guys understood the basics of the Python scripting knowledge. Now, I think we have time for a few questions if you want. If there's any particular questions that you want to do, you can raise your hand. And I don't know, maybe we can do this by talking. By the way, I will share this with you. How do we share this definition? I will share this complete definition with you if you want. Thanks, Jonathan. It's nice to see you there. Carlos asking if there will be more webinars, and sure, why not? There will be more webinars. They are recorded so that you can check them out and go back to them if you need to see them again. We will post them on the Rhino 3D blog, where you found this one already from start. We will post the recorded session. It will also be in our Rhino channel. And yes, this is just the start of a series of free flash workshops in the spirit of sharing some Grasshopper knowledge from the very basic level, hopefully building into much more complexity and specificity as much as you want to. Thanks, guys, for the good feedback. Still, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. Thanks, guys. Okay, Philip, importing stuff from outside of Rhino, it's something that we will do in the future, and it's not a hard thing. We can actually do maybe one session where we will create our own modules and import them into the Grasshopper Python component. There you are. Okay, great. So maybe anything on Rhino geometry? Yes, Jonathan, I'm very keen on using the Rhino geometry library, and we will be using the Rhino geometry, the Rhino common Rhino geometry operations for the next courses, instead of the Rhino script syntax library. So yes, Maltesh, I know that there is a essential Python book on the way and in the works. I don't know when it's due. It's going to be due, but it's on the works. So keep an eye for it. And yes, thanks. So great. So in the spirit of starting and finishing on time, I'm going to leave you guys. Thanks for joining. I hope you did learn something useful and especially some solid knowledge for the future. And please keep posted on the blog, on the Rhino 3D blog for the next webinars and for the videos that we're going to post.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Ciao everybody.
Bye.